Conistee, how are ye? Welcome back to the Candlelit Tales podcast, where we tell stories from Irish mythology and chat about them afterwards. My name is Aaron, and I'm one half of the sibling storytelling duo that makes up Candlelit Tales. And this spring, we've been delving in to the High King, Cormac Mac Airt, and his past, backstory, and where he went. And now we're going to listen to where he went into the Otherworld. And this is one of the more famous stories of Cormac Mac Airt. If you haven't caught up on the whole series, go back to the start, Art and Octon, on episode 1 of this series, and like, subscribe, comment, share, or if you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Candlelit Tales and be like our Patreon supporters who we talk to every month to get to know them and ask questions, or they ask us questions and have a chat every month. And that'd be lovely if you want to support us that way. Or PayPal button on our website where you can find out more about our workshops and our live shows and whatever else you'd like to know about Candlelit Tales. But before I go on too long, sit back, enjoy the story, and hey, Sorga, tell us the story, will you?
The year had seemed short, but the walk seemed to take days. Cormac trudged through the mist. This unending wall of grey. He walked until he must, if he were still in Ireland, have come to the sea. And then he walked more. And then the mist began to clear. Now Cormac's feet should have been aching. His legs should have felt like lead weights. But he felt surprisingly hale. Surprisingly untired. The first thing he saw emerging from the mist was a strange sight. A great house with bronze walls. And there were artisans on the roof. They were thatching it. They were thatching the roof of that great gleaming bronze house. But they were not using straw, and they were not using reeds, and they were not using rushes. They were using the white wings of birds. They were weaving them down into an incredible creation, a beautiful sight. And then the wind blew up. Just as they were finishing, the wind blew up and all those wings strained and flapped and flew away. And with all their work undone, those artisans of the other world, they looked at one another and they tisked. And then one of them picked up a wing, and they began their work all over again. Cormac wondered at the sight, but he did not know what it meant, so he went on. He came to a man with an axe who was cutting a tree down, chopping and chopping a whole oak tree, casting it into a bonfire that roared, hot and strong, and reduced the tree to ash. And then the man went back, pulling another great ancient oak tree, a noble of the wood. A tree that would never be cut down in Ireland without the whole tribe coming together to discuss it first. Cormac could see. This fire was so great, it was burning so fiercely that this man barely had time to chop down a tree before it was consumed, and the fire demanded more and more and more and more. He wondered at the sight, but he did not know what it meant. And he went on. He came to a quiet courtyard, and he could hear the sound of running water. They could see a fountain in the middle, with 5 streams coming from it and flowing out and away. And there was a great fish, with rainbow scales, a huge salmon, swimming about the streams, jumping into the fountain, switching from one stream to the other, playing in amongst them. Cormac wondered at the sight, but he did not know what it meant. And at last he came to a house. Now, finally, the weariness was starting to tell. He was beginning to feel like a man past his prime who had walked for too long in a strange country. His head was stuffed with strange visions and his body was tired and he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten or even drunk anything. And he was dropping, and so he knocked. And the door was answered by a beautiful lady who said, Cormac Mac Airt, High King of Ireland, be welcome. He was a little beyond surprise at that point to hear himself addressed, but he came in. She told him the lord of the house was not there at present, but would be along soon. And she asked him if he'd eaten. And he said no. And he started to say something more, but she said, well, you are in the land of plenty. You are in the land of plenty and we are never wanting for anything here. And she rang a little bell and a servant came in carrying a pig and a log. And the servant cut the log and killed the pig and spitted it and put it above the log. And she said, now, this is an interesting pig and an interesting log. For that log will only cook that pig if stories are told before it is turned. 4 stories, 1 for each quarter of the pig. And if we do this, and if we eat the meat but keep the bones and put them away in the skin, in the morning, that pig will be whole again, as if nothing had ever happened, and the log will be unburned. And she proceeded to tell him then all the wonders of this land, until his head was even more stuffed with visions. Visions of grain that never ran out, and pigs that came back to life, and sheep, and cattle that never ran dry, and everything he could ever dream of, so prosperous, so bountiful, so overflowing with anything anyone could ever want. And then he told the story of how he'd come to be there. And then he said the thing that she had interrupted him from saying before. Because he was the High King, and because he had come with his warriors. Even though the pig was cooked now and smelled delicious, he couldn't eat without his company. The High King must make sure his warriors are fed, and his people are fed, before he eats, Cormac told her. That was only fair and only just. And the woman smiled and drew back a curtain. And there were Cormac's warriors. Footsore and bewildered, but all of them hale and all of them whole and all of them well, having followed him into the other world. And then Cormac looked and saw among their company was his host, the stranger that he had met on the hillside at Tara. And the stranger smiled at Cormac and he said, do you know who I am? Cormac said, now, here, in this place. He saw that stranger well and he said, I suppose you're a Manannán Mac Airt of the two at Danann. Manannán nodded his head. He said, you followed me at last. I've been wanting to bring you here, Cormac, for 3 years now and teach you. Because you're on the right track, but you're not there yet. There's something that you are forgetting. And he told Cormac then. He told Cormac what he had seen and what it meant. He said, you can labour all your life on a wonderful thing. But not all wonderful things last. A creation of beauty can be blown away by the wind and leave nothing behind it. And then if you are too concerned with your own life and think nothing of your descendants, you can burn up everything in the world just to serve yourself and leave nothing behind. And that is what you saw in the man who burned the oak trees whole. And that fountain with the 5 streams and the salmon. Those are the 5 races of men. They're all from the same source. They are all the one people. Does not matter what tribe, what tua, what county, what province, what country a person is from, they are a person, and they are connected. And what flows in their veins flows in yours. And if you remember these three things, the prosperity, the plenty, the bounty will follow. And if you forget, that way lies grief. And then he told Cormac that since they had been in the land of promise, his son and his daughter and his wife had been well taken care of. And he drew back another curtain, and there they were, Cormac's family together in the other world. He embraced them in relief, and at long last they sat down to eat at the table of Manannán Mac Airt. And Manannán gave Cormac one last gift. He gave him a cup. And he told him, this cup breaks if a lie is spoken. And he spoke a lie, and the cup fell in 3 parts. And then he said the cup is made whole when 3 truths are spoken. And then he told Cormac that his son had not seen a woman, his daughter had not seen a man, his wife had not seen a man, in all the time they'd been in the land of promise under his protection. And Cormac watched in wonder as the fragments of the golden cup sprang up and joined together as good as new. And then they went home. Cormac didn't remember the journey back so well as he remembered the journey out, through that cold mist with his stomach churning, and the worry and the grief about his family boiling in his mind. He had so much to ponder on the way back. Thought of legacy and plenty. And he realized that for all his hard work, he had been selfish with his gift. He knew he had an instinct for justice. He knew it was based on an older code that he had learned from his foster father, and from his mother, and from his earliest days with the wolves. And he knew that it was rooted in his belief that people cannot stand alone. They must work together for survival, the same way the wolves must. But they must also have solitude. They must also have their own individuality, as his mother did, as the druids and the Otherworld showed him, the wonders that that could bring. And they must work together. And they must make structures and politics and policies so that they could do that in a way that was not arbitrated by one man's judgment, that was necessarily imperfect. So Cormac realized what he needed to do. He needed to make something that would live beyond him. He needed a code that others could follow. Not just an instinct. Not just a pull. Not a magic treasure from the other world. For he knew that that would not stay in this world after his death. So Cormac gathered together all those who practiced justice. All those kings and queens and filii who were known as people who could mediate a dispute. He brought them all together in one place. And he thought it was so that they could learn, and very quickly he realized how much he had to learn from them, how much they could teach each other. And there were procedures made. And there were guidelines decided. And it was agreed that every year the Brehons would meet. For that was the name they were given now. Not filii, but Brehons. Those who dispensed justice. And they would train apprentices who would advocate for different people so that everyone involved in a dispute had a representative. who could speak for them, who would be versed in the protocols and the procedures. And every Brehon stand in judgment would know that their highest goal was not to punish, but to heal, to bring the community back together. And they decided on the fines that they would levy, what fines would be appropriate for what offences. But it was all so contextual. It was all so complex. And these were people who loved complexity as much as Cormac did. He found himself delighting in their company on those annual days when they all gathered. And on those days, they would go through every strange case any one of them had had. Any time a new judgment had to be made. Because what do you do when a woman cultivates a flower bed and the woman next door keeps bees? And the bees gather the nectar from the flowers, and that does pollinate the flowers, but it also takes from the garden of the gardener and brings back to the beekeeper. So, what quantity of honey to the gardener, and what quantity to the beekeeper? Well, there were volumes written on that, and that alone. And this system, this rule of law, this Brehon law, this held sway in Ireland. On the island long, long after Cormac Mac Airt died. Long after his truth-telling cup and his silver branch were taken back to the Otherworld. Long, long after. His story was just a story. This was justice with no prisons and no police. This was justice that harmonised, that brought people together. And on this island, it has never been repealed. This Brehon law.